Hey Potomac, it's Miss Conley. Just here to read you the next two chapters of Freedom Crossing, and hope you're doing well. Just in a different spot today, but just chilling out and getting ready to read you some more of the Freedom Crossing story. Hope you've been following along with me. Remember that we left off with, oh, I gotta look at my book. Oh, the slave was cornered at the church in town. That's where we left off. Yeah, see, Miss Conley's just drawing a blank here. So, I hope you enjoy Freedom Crossing, and we're getting to the the good part. Remember, they discovered Tryon's Folly, and they discovered the cellars, and we're thinking that this would be the place that Martin is going to go to. So, sorry, my hair is just a hot mess today. No makeup, no hair done, but that's okay. We're inside, and you guys are the only ones looking at me right now, so. I miss you guys at Potomac, and hope you're doing well. So here is chapters 13 and 14 of Freedom Crossing. Okay, bye. Okay, so here is chapter 13 of Freedom Crossing, the fastest horse in town. At Cayuga Street, Laura turned left and passed directly in front of the Todd house. Men were still posted there, near the front and the rear entrances. Joel had the window to the right of the porch wide open and was leaning out so far that he was in danger of falling into the bed of zinnias below. His hair was tousled by the wind, and his eyes were snapping with excitement. Although Laura was only a few feet from him, he seemed to pay no attention to her. His eyes were on the crowd up the street. Thus ignored, Laura hurried by with burning cheeks. She wished she knew why he had failed to greet her. Was it because he didn't want the guard at the front door to know that they were acquainted? Or couldn't he forgive her for her southern sympathies? Perhaps, she thought sadly, they would never again be friends. Across the street, on the southeast corner, Cayuga and Fish Street, stood the Presbyterian Church. It was built of stone and was quite imposing, with its bell tower and front portico with 4 graceful columns. The two large front doors at either end of the porch were closed, and several men stood before them, holding off the crowd that filled the lawn and overflowed onto the road in front of the building. "Set him free!" shouted a man. At once the call was repeated by many voices. "Set him free!" Again Laura was torn by conflicting emotions. All these people were connected over one black man. They had stopped whatever they were doing to come look at him and to try to keep him from being sent back down south. Yesterday she couldn't have understood this, but now she knew Martin, and that made all the difference in the world. Before, she had thought of slaves as property belonging to plantation owners such as Uncle Jim. But now, because of Martin, she knew that slaves were people, and it was only right that a person should have the chance to live a life of his own. No one should own a person. At the right of the church, the two boys were taking turns boosting each other up so they could see into a small window that was an inch or two ajar. As she watched, she saw an angry sheriff's deputy chase them away. Laughing, the boys ran down the slope. Laura scurried after them, panting, and asked, "Did you see him?" "Who?" asked the elder of the two boys. "The runaway. I just saw him a minute. What does he look like?" "Black," said the boy. He exchanged a glance with his friend and laughed. "He looks like any black man. They all look alike." Laura felt indignant. The very idea, saying that all blacks looked alike. You might as well say all white people looked alike. They were thin or fat or old, or they were young like Martin and had big eyes that could look scared or merry or grateful. Something was happening on the porch of the church. Shouts and a sound of scuffling reached her ears, but from where she stood, she couldn't see what was going on. The few people who were not already crowded around the front porch of the church hurried to get there. Laura was about to go up the hill again when she noticed a man wearing a deputy's badge slip quietly into a small side door near the rear of the church. Less than a minute later, he came out leading a tall, slim black dressed in a shabby blue shirt and tan pants. Behind him was another deputy. At the same moment, a carriage came hurtling down Fish Street from the direction of the town. One glance told Laura that it was the Eastman. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Eastman carriage, drawn by Sally, galloping for all she was worth. Down the hill she came, directly toward Laura, who stood speechless and motionless. Someone pushed her roughly back against the wall of the church. Afterward, she couldn't say whether it was one of the deputies or the black who had shoved her to safety. But confused though she was, she looked hard at the two men in the carriage. One she had never seen before, but the other was the black-bearded man who had been in Josiah Tryon's tailor shop. The black-bearded man who had the reins shouted to Sally and pulled her to a halt. He reached out of the carriage, seized the black by the wrist, and hoisted him into the carriage beside him. With a crack of the whip, the carriage was off again, continuing down the hill even faster than before. Someone in the crowd in front of the church shouted, "There he goes!" The two men, both of whom Laura recognized as being among the slave hunters who had come to the house looking for Martin, leaped into a carriage and took chase. Laura doubted they could catch up, for the first carriage had a long head start, and Sally, as Bert had said, was the fastest horse in town. One of the deputies who had been with the black disappeared into the church, but a crowd quickly gathered around the other deputy. Laura, with her back against the rough stone wall of the church, found that she couldn't leave unless she were to push her way through a horde of men. Timidly, she remained where she was, getting more and more uncomfortable and uneasy. "What happened? Why'd you let him go?" a man asked the deputy. The deputy seemed as puzzled as Laura. "We were going to move him over to the sheriff's house for safekeeping. You never can tell what might happen with a crowd like this, and we didn't want anybody getting hurt. Next thing we knew, the carriage came down the hill, and a fellow grabbed the fugitive and took off with him. You should have had him handcuffed to you. Sounds to me like you didn't put up much of a fight." To Laura's dismay, the slave hunter named Walt joined the group. "We're going to get to the bottom of this," he declared. "I think you had this all set up." "We were going to take him to the courthouse in Lockport as soon as we could," protested the deputy. "We want justice done just the same as you." "I don't like your idea of justice," Walt snarled. As the deputy started to walk away, Walt reached out to seize him, but several of the local citizens came quietly between the two men, giving the deputy time to escape. Laura, seeing an opening, edged away from the wall of the church and started up the hill. She had taken only a few steps when Walt blocked her way. "Miss Eastman, what do you know about this?" he demanded. "You were down here when it happened. I saw you." Nothing," she stammered. "That was your horse and carriage. I know it anywhere. Who was in that carriage?" he insisted. "I don't know." She tried to get around him, but as quickly as a cat he leaped in front of her again. Walt glared at her. "You're no Southerner. You're just like everyone else in this town, ready to break the law." "Let me go," Laura cried out. "I'm not through with you yet." Laura was close to despair. The crowd was scattering, and no one seemed to pay any attention to her. Then she saw Bert coming toward them. He had never looked as good to her as he did at that moment. She ducked wildly around Walt and ran to her brother. Bert growled, "You leave my sister alone." And to Laura's surprise, Walt backed away. It couldn't be that he was afraid of a tall, thin 13-year-old. It must be that he had seen the sheriff coming down the church steps and realized he would get no sympathy from that source. Bert took Laura's elbow and said quietly, "Let's go." "That was our carriage," she whispered, still trembling. "I know it." Bert sounded impatient, and so does everyone else. "Everyone in this town knows Sally. Wait till Pa hears this. We'll really be in trouble." He looked accusingly at Laura. "Why didn't you stay in the carriage?" "I wanted to see if it was Martin. I had just as much right to look as you did." Bert dropped the subject. "I wish I knew who was in that carriage." "One of the men. That was the fellow we saw in Mr. Tryon's shop today. The man with the black beard." "Is that so? Well," Bert looked hopeful. "I wonder—" "What do you wonder?" Bert glanced around to see if anyone was near them. "That man might be connected with the Underground Railroad." "Of course it was someone from the Underground," Laura said positively. "Who else would steal a fugitive away?" "Some of the slave catchers might. It's the fellow who takes a slave down south who gets the bounty." A carriage drawn by a sturdy black horse came up beside them. The sheriff leaned out. "Do you and your sister need a ride home, Bert?" "Thanks, we sure do." As they traveled out the ridge road toward home, Laura couldn't help smiling to herself as she tried to guess what Mrs. Fitch would think if she saw them being taken home by the sheriff. When he stopped in front of the Eastman house, the sheriff said, "Don't worry about your horse and carriage. I'm sure we'll get them back for you." Laura wondered how he could be so positive. The rights of a human. The house had a deserted look. No one would guess a runaway slave was hiding inside. Laura reflected as the sheriff dropped them off at the end of the drive. As soon as they had closed the door behind them, Bert called out, "Martin, we're back! It's Bert and Laura!" There was no answer. At once the thought flashed through Laura's mind, "He's gone! The slave catchers came while we were away and found him." Bert took the stairs 2 at a time, shouting, "Martin, you hear me?" Laura lifted her long skirts and hurried after him. As she approached her room, she heard Martin's now familiar voice slightly muffled. "I'm here, Mr. Bert. Soon's I heard someone come on the porch, I ducked down in the little hole. I thought it was you, but I didn't dare take a chance." When Laura reached her room, Martin had pushed aside the carpet and was crawling out the secret room. "I'm glad to see you," she exclaimed. "They caught a runaway in the church, and for a while we were afraid it was you." Martin's eyes widened. "He got away," Laura assured him. "I think it must have been George, the slave, who was hiding at Joel's house." "Did anyone come here?" asked Bert. "Nope, but every time I heard a noise, I'd jump back in this hole." Martin turned to Bert. "Where's your carriage? I didn't hear it come in." Bert explained how their carriage had been taken. "So now we have to figure out another way to get you to the river tonight." In the excitement, Laura hadn't thought of this. "Bert, you can't take him through town on foot. We'll go through the woods." Laura said firmly, "You'll never be able to find your way at night. You'll just have to wait till Pa gets home." Bert set his jaw stubbornly. "Don't try to tell me what I can do. A boat's coming to pick up Martin at midnight, and I'm going to have him there to meet it. And if we don't get there tonight, the plans will have to be made all over again. How long do you think we can keep him hidden? Uncle Daniel will be here by morning." Laura recognized her mistake. It was no use telling Bert what to do. "All right," she said. "You figure it out." "Where are you going to take me?" Martin asked nervously. Laura said, "You tell him about Tryon's Folly, Bert. I'm going down and get some supper for us." By 6:30, supper was finished and the dishes were washed. The evening stretched ahead endlessly. Laura accompanied Bert when he went out to feed the chickens. She stared anxiously at the sky, hoping to find clouds that would provide an early cover of darkness. But the entire sky was clear. The quarter moon looked ready and able to light up the land for hours. Bert noticed his sister looking at the sky. "Don't get your hopes up," he said. "The moon doesn't set till 10:30 tonight. I looked in the almanac to be sure. I don't dare take Martin out until after it goes down. Even if it isn't a full moon, it gives more light than I want tonight." All three gathered in Laura's room to be near Martin's hiding place. Bert closed the inside shutters so any watchful eyes would be unable to see the three figures walking about where there should have been only two. Martin seated himself on the floor beside the lamp table to read a well-worn paper Bert had given him. Laura noticed the masthead, "Frederick Douglass's paper." "What's that?" she asked. "It's an abolitionist paper," Bert answered. "You know, against slavery. It used to be called the North Star because slaves followed the North Star to freedom. It's put out by a man who used to be a slave, Frederick Douglass." Laura stared at him. "You mean the editor is a black man?" Bert smiled. "He is, and what's more, I've seen him." Martin looked up with an odd expression. "You've seen Mr. Douglass?" "I stood as close to him as I am to you right now. He came to Lockport to give a talk. He's handsome, big, with a head of hair like a lion." Laura was stunned. In the South, even suggestion that a black man could write and run a newspaper would be unthinkable. "Let me see that for a second, Martin." Bert held out his hand for the paper. He studied it until he found what he wanted. "Here it is. Pa showed this to me. He says that in a few words, this tells the whole story of what he believes in. Listen." Bert read aloud. "I know no rights of race superior to the rights of humanity." "Did Frederick Douglass write that?" Laura asked. Bert nodded. Laura thought for a moment. "It's true, isn't it?" she exclaimed. "A person should have the rights of a human being, no matter what color he is. That's the meaning, isn't it?" "I think so," said Bert. "Or maybe that being a white doesn't give us the right to take away a black person's human rights." "Only, what are the rights of a human being?" Laura asked thoughtfully. "To be free," said Martin. "And to be treated with respect," Laura added. Bert suggested life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as in the Declaration of Independence says. "Have I been asleep for 4 years?" Laura wondered. She asked herself why she hadn't thought about such things before. Uncle Jim and Aunt Ruth and their friends seemed to think it was natural and the right that blacks should be slaves, and she accepted their attitude without questioning it. The clock on the stairs boomed 7 times, more than 3 hours before Bert and Martin could leave. "Maybe you two should get some rest," Laura suggested. "I'll stay on watch." "I couldn't sleep," said Bert. "How about you, Martin?" "I won't sleep again until I'm across the river." He grinned. I'll sleep in the promised land. Bert paced back and forth. I'll be glad when you're there. He went to the front window, lifted the slat in one of the shutters, and peered out. I wonder if Joel will be able to get away. If he thought he could come, he wouldn't have sent that note, Laura snapped. Stop pacing around. Can't you find something to do? Bert stared at her. What's the matter? You don't have to worry about. I'm the one who has to get Martin to the river. A mischievous gleam came into his eyes, and he bolted from the room. When he came back, he had a book in his hand. Martin and I can keep busy. We'll take turns reading out loud. Martin looked pleased. I'd like that. Bert sat down on the floor near Martin and opened the book. Uncle Tom's Cabin, he read, by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Laura felt angry and hurt. She had changed many of her ideas that day, but she still wasn't ready to accept Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Jim had said it was a pack of lies. I told you I didn't want to see that book, she exclaimed. Then don't look, then. Bert held the book higher to catch the light on the page. Martin was lying on his back, a rapt expression on his face. I always did want to read Uncle Tom's Cabin. Laura went into the hall. She'd go down to the kitchen and sit. She could find something to read, too. Behind her, Bert's voice went on with the reading. She looked back at the room where the lamp spread a pool of light on the carpet. It was marked in contrast to the dark hall. There was companionship, at least in that room. She sighed and went back. Taking up her sewing, she sat down in her rocker. Bert said teasingly, I thought you were going to leave us. Bert wrinkled her nose at him. I might as well hear the foolish thing. When Bert tired of reading, Martin took over. Despite herself, Laura became so lost in the story she forgot to move her needle. Can it be true that slaves are treated like that, she asked herself. Then she remembered Martin's scars and things she hadn't paid attention to when she was living with her aunt and uncle. Frightened black faces, hurried whispers. Now Martin had reached the part where Uncle Tom was sold down south. That almost happened to my pappy, he exclaimed. Master was going to sell him, and we never see him again. Only my pappy isn't like Uncle Tom. He wouldn't let our family be split, so we all ran away. And so it did happen like that. When she thought about it, Laura remembered how the owner of a plantation near Uncle Jim's had sold a man and woman down south. He kept their children and had one of the other slaves take them in. Martin was an uneven reader. Often he had to stop to ask Bert how to pronounce a word. Laura finally became impatient. Here, let me read for a while, she said. She pulled her chair close to the lamp table. The clock chimed, and Laura stopped reading to count the strokes. 9 o'clock. She was amazed. Time was going much faster, almost too fast. She read on. For 15 or 20 minutes later, Martin jumped up from the floor and whispered excitedly, Somebody's coming. Laura closed the book, keeping the place with her finger. In the silence, she heard voices outside. Footfalls sounded on the front steps. She knew at once it wasn't Pa and Abby and Uncle Daniel. It was too soon for them. Besides, they would come to the back door. Laura felt her heart leap with fear. Who would be coming at this hour of night?